It's always good to come and speak to a bunch of ladies that's open and have children's needs close to their heart. I'm going to jump around with a few topics this morning because when Dalian approached me, she asked me, can I talk not necessarily about my career and my job, but can I talk about myself and who I am and the balance of my life and how I balance things. And I think it's very difficult for me to really talk about that because my career is very intertwined in who I am. My sort of passion is to talk to people about sort of, how close to my heart children's needs lies. And I think that is what I'm going to focus on today. And I hope that you enjoy sharing with me the opportunity to talk about the children that I have seen. To give you a bit of background, I started at Stellenbosch University and I did my psychology and my social work. And in my third year, you have to do an internship. And I must be honest with you, looking back, I wasn't a great student. In Stellenbosch, you do what you do as a student. And my marks weren't great. So in your third year, it was sort of an awakening of arriving at my first internship and now really have to apply my knowledge and not knowing much, being 18, 19 years old. A part of it that I didn't know was an abortion clinic. And I had to sit through some of the abortions. And that was my real first experience, I would say, with life and with things that happens to start sort of briefing young children about their choices of termination of pregnancies. And there was another student with me, and we started with sort of this counseling process with these young kids, trying to sort of make, the best decision that we possibly can. And after that, we went to a community service project where we had to go and sort of teach sex workers about sort of safe sex. And after that, we did our group work at a sex worker, a very old sex worker that was with a very high level of clientele and the things that she did there. And I must be honest, I think after that day, I was totally shocked and devastated. And, you think as a young student, some of the students are still sort of hanging around on campus, and now you have to start teaching children about the decisions that they make in their life and the very important decisions. And I spoke to, at that stage, my co-student, and she said she cannot go back. And she actually didn't go back to university after that because it was really a shock to our system because we weren't prepared at all to deal with these things. And I think at that moment, and I always realized and sort of as a child wanted to be a therapist, but I think at that moment I sort of got sort of the inner peace that I'm following the right path. And I started focusing on children and children's mental health. And from there on, I just kept on focusing on what I feel is my sort of journey in life, is to look at sort of the interests of the child and giving children a voice. So from there on, I went back to university and I sort of completed my degree and I started working with children. And I did a play therapy master's at Tikkies to really get the tools to be able to work with children. And I do believe, we don't want doom and gloom this morning, and we are making a difference, but we still need to focus on how we can make a difference that everyone can see out there. And I think after I've did some of my PhDs, I realized that at the end of the day, people are not really aware of what kids are going through. And I was still speaking to professionals and to people, lay people, teachers, parents, and it seemed that they had their head in the sand. And when you start speaking about sort of what kids are going through, they say, no, this cannot be happening. this is not possible. It's not happening in South Africa. Yes, we know there's problems, but not these kind of problems. And I had a journey with a child that was placed in a dog kennel. And we had to take her out 6 years later. She was sort of enclosed in this dog kennel. And I think when I sort of experienced that, I needed to write about these things that people can know, but this is really happening. And it's not just far out, that we can't see it. It's happening in our communities. So for me, it was important that we get the message out, that there is a very, very big need, that our children needs to be heard. We need to give them a voice. They do not have a voice, and they are actually silenced. And kids are still, things have changed a lot throughout the years. In the younger days, it was said, kids shouldn't be heard, and now we are giving our kids a voice. But we've got a long way to go for children really to acknowledge the power that they've got to speak up. And I do believe that, people laugh at me, oh, why do you keep on studying? And there is a time to stop. But I don't believe there is a time to stop. We've been put here to really sort of make a difference. And through sort of supplying academic knowledge for people, they can use that as tools in our community to really, really make a change. And I really try in my life, and I think that's where the balance comes in, is, I think my favorite place is behind my laptop in my study, where I can also just put my head in the sand a bit. But I try to also get out and to really see what is going on. So I don't just study. I think a lot of people think if you've got three PhDs, you just study and you never get out in the real world. But the reality is I do a lot of work. I do see the kids as well. It's not sort of things that I create and make up. It's not just paperwork. I don't always have high heels on. I go into the field and I really work as a social worker to give back to the community and to make a change there for the kids. And I do believe if you have not sort of worked with children on that level, you don't understand their pain and their emotional experience. You first have to look into a child's eyes that have been sexually abused, that have gone through a journey where parents have been severe alcoholics, that have enclosed them in all sorts of closets and rooms and abused them physically, emotionally, before you can really understand what is needed to make a change for our children. We as people need to start taking responsibility for our own children, but also for other people's children. So for me, that was quite an interesting sort of clip, is to see, that we need to sort of get ourselves together and emotionally commit to really hear the child and what they need, and to spend all of our own things as adults that can become overwhelming. And for me, I often speak to people and to have feedback to say, but you don't understand, and your life looks so perfect, and but you've got all these things. And the reality is, I'm a normal person. I've got normal challenges. I've got a job, I've got kids, I've got a husband. And yes, it's complicated. You need to juggle a lot of balls. But the reality is that to be an adult, you need to be responsible. And if your child doesn't have a voice in your house, they won't have the confidence in a situation like this to stand up and say, no, sorry, I'm going to my mommy. So for me, it is very, very important that I teach my children and that I teach other people to teach their children that they can stand up. And that means you need to balance the act very carefully, obviously with the respect. But I teach my children, they can say what they want to say. If they do not agree with me, even at a young age, they must voice their opinion. That I can make sure it's not necessary to tell them 100 times that they can't go with a stranger. They know that they are able to talk and to clearly say what they feel comfortable with and what they don't feel comfortable with. So we need to start at home to make a change with our children. And in organizations as well, we need to teach children. They do have a voice. They can feel if they have that feeling of uncomfortability and that this is wrong and this can go wrong. They must get out of that situation. But then they need confidence. And confidence comes with love, with support, with spending time with your child. I was at a recent talk where an educator took the floor and she spoke. And she posed the question to the audience and said, how much time do you think is needed? And it was to parents, to spend time with your kids. And then some people say, no, an hour, 2, 3 hours, 5 hours, different answers, 10 minutes. It depends quality, quantity, and it was a debate. And then the educator said, no, statistically, it indicates you need to spend an hour a day with your child. And that includes to pick up and fetch and make food. And I sat there and I thought, this is not real. What can you do in an hour a day, including all the busy lives that we run with our kids, to really make an impact? And for us to be good parents, to be good therapists, to really look at the needs of the child, the right answer is you need to be available 24/7. And that is how it is. For me, I work out of a child-centered approach. The world goes around children. That is what makes the world go around. And that for me is the most important thing. We need to think about our children in society every minute of the day to make a change. So while we spend time with our own kids, we need to think and teach our children as well how we can make a difference for other children and to really give them the moral support to make a constructive change in society. And that for me is needed for children growing up in our society today and for us as adults in working with children and being confronted with children. And perhaps you're not a therapist or working at an organization or not a parent, but the reality is that the most vulnerable population group in the world is children. And that means that it takes a community to really think, what are we going to do to reach and sort of get to the needs of the child? Now, I'm going to play the next excerpt, and it's, so we've now seen how easy it is for young children in their formative years to be conned by a lovely puppy. And I think the next problem, and that relates to the excerpt in the book that I'm going to read, is how our teenagers are confronted with huge dilemmas these days. If I think the biggest panic that people have is when they lose their phone or if their phone is in the car because they can't quickly check their WhatsApps and who's going to phone. And I can't see who posted photos on Facebook. And we are confronted with huge interference with the media that has put us in a different place of new concerns. And we often see teenagers sit on their phones quite frequently. And we don't really know what they are being exposed to. So what this experiment did, and it's a bit sort of in your face, but it was a guy that posted a false profile on Facebook. And girls between 12 and 15 started communicating with this guy. And they sort of planned a date. But it didn't take a long time. We're not talking about years or months of interaction before they decided to meet with this guy. Now, the reality is, it is as quick as that, where you don't know who this person is. You're meeting this person, you don't know even where you are or what the implications are, and you're putting yourself at risk. And this is not just a teenage issue. It happens to young adults, it happens to students, it even happens to young women and men that is in a situation where they want to find companionship and love and connection. So the important thing is, if we look at all of these things, we can feel overwhelmed and we can feel society is crazy, what is happening? And, you can sort of sit and think this is just too much. But I do believe if we communicate effectively with our children and we teach children how to effectively communicate, we can make a difference. And if you look at kids that come into practice and to sit down with the problems that they face, a lot of them can't really talk about things that is happening. They don't have the voice, they don't have the confidence or the courage to really say what is going on in their lives. And it is our job to give them the courage that they can make the change for themselves, that they don't get themselves in a situation like this or similar to this. And this is only, physical contact in social media interactions, but there's so many other ways these days that children are confronted with being in a very vulnerable position very quickly. So I think it's so important that we put our heads together and think, how are we going to deal with these dilemmas of society? To be more proactive, and we are already active, but to be even more proactive to deal with the new dilemmas that we are faced with. So for me, I would like you to, if you've got a book in your little packets, if you want to read with me, on page 43, there was a child that I consulted with, and from the outside, it didn't look like severely tragic circumstances. And you could even be fooled to think, this is quite normal therapy. As a therapist in a day, you can see quite a lot of things. And you hope for the case that sits there, that's sort of an easy case for the day. That's not a huge crisis, because we do operate in crisis mode quite frequently. And this child was taken willingly by a social media boyfriend that she thought was her boyfriend. She thought this would be a better sort of life for her, to go on a trip with him. Her mom wasn't always there. She had her own emotional problems, and dad tried his best, but it was complicated. And this child felt vulnerable, and she made the wrong decision. And I would like you to see sort of what happened in this case. I'm going to read from where she has been taken and she's come back. And a lot of these kids are never found. But with her, we call it the lucky one, but what she's experienced was far from lucky. But we got her back, and she is living a relatively normal life, and she's worked through her things. But I'll start the passage from where she is in the hospital. As she opened her eyes, she saw him. She started crying. The tears ran down her face, and she was overwhelmed by tears and feeling of sadness and pain. This was the breakthrough. The reunion between father and daughter would help the silenced child to talk. This would help her heal and would make it possible for me to help her with this journey. She kept on crying, and I left them alone. The silenced child was crying. When I returned an hour later, after studying her file and looking at the medication that was administered and at her observation charts, I found her father still holding the hand of that now looked like a little girl still crying. The healing would take a long time, but with this journey, this little girl would learn to understand and process what she had gone through. In the months of therapy that followed, I learned of the underworld of sex trafficking. This girl was the perfect target of human trafficking. A man of 35 lured her into a relationship where she felt safe, heard, and loved. He promised her the world if she would run away with him. This was a girl that felt rejected by her mother and somewhat ignored by her father, and wanted and needed some love and attention. And this is what this man provided for her. It was all planned, and he operated like a master. He knew what he was doing, And this was definitely not the first time that he had done this. The night that she disappeared, they drove off to the border and went through the border post for false identification, posing as boyfriend and girlfriend. He masterfully executed a carefully designed plan. This was their first stop, and she could still recall how special she felt. The adrenaline pumping through her body, feeling that she had left all her problems behind. After a week, he wanted to introduce her to some of his friends, and she met a very good-looking man. He introduced her to more girls that she could relate to. They all came from difficult circumstances and had felt rejected by their parents. They were all in the same boat and experienced true love and a connection with these men that they had met over the internet. She started to think that this was weird. Why would they all be together at the same place? Soon she realized that this was not a pleasant dream, but the start of a nightmare. In the days that followed, she was beaten, raped, emotionally manipulated, embarrassed, and her dignity was taken away from her. She was introduced to the world of drugs, and she died. She repeated over and over again, I died, my body died, I died, and my soul died. Who have I become? Who would ever find me again? She had gone through the unimaginable. She survived, and that in itself was a miracle. We had to work with what she had gone through to build up her life again. She would have to learn how to live again, to trust people in her life again, and to free herself from the trap into which she had fallen of becoming a slave for human trafficking. I think this was a very brave child to have gone through what she have gone. And I think with all of these matters, it is really a journey to recover, but it is possible to recover. We can all make a difference. And at the end of the day, we have to be kind to ourselves and to others to really make a change in this world. You must never sort of suspend things that is close to your heart because you don't think there's enough time. There's time to do everything. And if we can get that balance right, we can save the world. And that is hopefully my journey, as many others, that is trying to make a difference for our children and to give them a voice. I want to end with a passage from Mother Teresa that says, the hunger for love is much more difficult to remove than the hunger for bread. When a poor person dies of hunger, it has not happened because God did not take care of him or her. It has happened because neither you nor I wanted to give that person what he or she needed. It is the greatest poverty to decide that a child must die so that you may live as you wish. On that note, I would love to give Dr. Omar a present from myself that I received from Giorgio Trobeck, that is quite a well-known Italian painter that painted this picture for my first book launch. And I do believe that it's got a special place somewhere in the Teddy Bear Clinic, that we can put it up to say that we are breaking the silence and that we know that every child has a voice and that we will not allow the silence to continue. Thank you.